Hi everybody, my name is Jordan, and yes, I'm dressed funny, number one, because it's hot in here, and so I like wearing shorts, and this is how I would dress if I was venturing into the Boundary Waters. So, life jacket always. So, let's get started. Who am I? Well, my name's Jordan for the third time, and I've been working in the senior living industry since 2015. I didn't have aspirations of working in senior living coming out of high school or even starting in college. So I started by going to school for law enforcement, and I actually did that for almost 2 years. I was almost done with my 2-year degree in law enforcement, which is all you need to actually go be a police officer for a lot of departments. And then just kind of thought, well, I might enjoy this for 5 or 6 years, and then I might get tired of it, so I better find something else that I can see myself doing long term. So my mother at the time actually worked for Presbyterian Homes at the corporate office and recommended that I go to the local assisted living and just check in and see if there was anything interesting. So I drove out to Waverly Gardens of North Oaks, walked up to the front desk and said, hey, I'm wondering if I'm interested in this. And the campus administrator, so the big boss, actually came out, sat down with me for 30 minutes, and chatted with me about his job, the whole industry, and kind of what it was all about. So he said, why don't you go and be a nursing assistant, see if you like that. And if that interests you at all, then you might be, good for this field. So that's what I did. Went and got my certified nursing assistant license. I did it through Century College. It took me about 6 weeks. And then I started as a caregiver or nursing assistant at Waverly Gardens. I did that for a year, and then I transitioned to a float position. So I worked at many different communities as a nursing assistant for 4 years. So in my caregiving years, I worked at 25 plus communities, all different care settings, assisted living, transitional care, skilled nursing, memory care, anything you can think of I've worked in. I then graduated in spring of 2020 with a degree in healthcare management. And then by December 2020, I had my first job as a housing director for an independent living. So then I completed the circle and got all the care settings done and had experience in independent living. I started with Ecumen in September of 2022. My role is currently a senior living consultant is my title. Really, it's a sales and marketing manager position. So I talk with families about this topic, talk about senior living, talk about assisted living, what are the ins and outs, why you might be looking, why you might be needing it. And that's kind of where I'm at today. So I look forward to talking about this topic. It's something that I do daily, and it's something I'm very passionate about. Outside of work, I'm a father of 2 crazy kids, as you can see, and I'm a fiance hoping to upgrade to husband in 2024, as long as I don't screw it up. When I'm not working, I enjoy spending time with my family, particularly in the outdoors. So fishing, kayaking, hunting, all that stuff is in my wheelhouse. But same time I started as a CNA, so in 2015 is the first time I took a trip to the Boundary Waters. So this is where the parallel comes in for me of the Boundary Waters and the senior living landscape. So I don't know if you know anything about the Boundary Waters at all, if any of you do. But it's a wilderness area up north Minnesota in Superior National Forest. It's 1,090,000 acres of wilderness. So it's almost all untapped land, forest, lakes, rivers, streams, and it's really just there for us to explore. And so now after this year's trip, this was trip number 7 for me, and I really have a good grasp on that wilderness. I feel like I can go into it, not worry about getting lost anymore. But it really took a good navigator and a good teacher and a really good map so that I don't get lost anymore. So that is what I'm here to do for you guys today, to give you a map, be a navigator to the senior living landscape as a whole, because there are a lot of different areas. Just for reference, this is a map of the trip we took this year. So I hope you can see it, but if you look at the top left, there's a white dot. That's the starting point. And then all the way on the right side of the screen, the white dot with a circle, that's the finish point. So it was 22 miles traveling. We did that in one day. So we got up at about 5 in the morning, got on the water about 5:45, and got to camp about 5:30. So as I said, today I'll be your navigator. This is a good example of one of the things you do in the Boundary Waters. This is a portage. So this is me carrying our boat across between lakes to get to the next lake so we can continue paddling. All right, first setting of senior living is independent living. So what is independent living? Well, it really is fairly self-explanatory. It's independent, which means you are living in your own space. You are not necessarily getting any care services. The difference between independent senior living and a standard apartment complex is the age restriction. So most of the time you're going to have a 55 plus or 62 plus housing setting. There may be some limited activity programs going on. A lot of times that's resident-led. For example, when I ran the independent living in Cambridge, Riverwood Village, I would help pay for some of the costs. So bingo prizes I'd buy for the community, but the residents would really put on the activity themselves. So that'll change as we get further down the different senior housing options. Another benefit of independent living is the safety precautions. So you're going to have a secure building. You're going to be living with folks that are similar to you and similar mindset. You're not going to have a bunch of crazy kids pounding on the walls. And then in independent livings that are part of a continuum of care, so part of a bigger care setting, you would get a life alert system that would work for people that are working in the building at that time. If it is a standalone independent living, so that's all that the building is, you probably don't get that button. So you'd have to go pursue it in outside services like the actual life alert company. So the when to move. So as you can see by this picture, we were attempting to go between two lakes, and the water levels were extremely low at the time, so we had to grab all of our 300 pounds of gear out of the canoe, walk through mud to go about from here to the back of the room. So it gets very frustrating. But when do you move to independent living? So my biggest recommendation for independent living is for folks that are either living alone or they're looking for a lot more socialization. So one of the biggest positives is you get to be in a community with other people that are similar minded, again, similar aged, and probably have similar interests. So you develop relationships again. So a lot of times folks, if they're living by themselves, may not have family in town, may not have friends nearby. So it's a great opportunity to kind of reconnect. You get peace of mind. In all independent livings, you're going to have maintenance needs met by the community. So you're not mowing the grass anymore. You're not worried about if the refrigerator dies. All that stuff's taken care of for you. So that's a nice savings. You're not going to pay any utility cost or very minimal. So at Riverwood Village in Cambridge, you would pay for cable and internet. At some independent livings, that's included. It varies to campus. But you're for sure not going to pay all of the heat, electric, and everything. You're going to pay maybe one or none. So kind of a sidestep. It's not necessarily another care setting, but it's right before we would go to assisted living is a home care option. So home care really is you're choosing to stay in an independent living or stay home and bringing the care that you may need to you. You're going to pay for a minimum number of hours with most companies. So even if you only need one thing for help per week, so maybe you need assistance with cleaning the bathroom because it's just not something you want to do anymore. You still would have to pay a minimum threshold of hours for the week for most home care companies. That ranges, some are like 8 hours, some are up to 15 for their base level. The benefit of this is you do get to stay home. So you are staying in your own home or your own independent living. You're only paying for the care you absolutely want, and they are there when you want them to be there. The caveat to that is they are only there when you pay for them to be there. So at 11 at night, if you drop the remote and you want someone to pick it up for you, there's no one there. Or God forbid you fall, there's not going to necessarily be someone there. That's where that life alert system is a good option, or the next care setting that we're going to talk about. So home care is really a bridge from independent living to assisted living. So you're not entirely on your own. As you can see in the canoe, while we are in the wilderness and we don't ever see anybody else for the most part, we still have to, be with each other. So you're kind of alone, but not entirely. That's how home care looks for the most part. Assisted living. This is kind of where my wheelhouse is focused right now. So in assisted living, as you can see, food is a big benefit. Looking at my expert chef abilities, that is supposed to be steak. If you can see that picture, it does not look good, and it really wasn't good. So my brother-in-law is the cook. I let him do it for the most part, but I do my best. So in assisted living, you are in a new environment. You are not in your house anymore. You are at a facility, in an apartment complex for the most part. And the goal in this is to assist you in being independent. So when you go to an assisted living, we don't want to take over everything that it is that you may be needing help with. We want to assist you to do those things. So that is a key point. Privacy when you want it and community when you need it. So you have your own apartment. You have your own, in most facilities, including ours, you have your own kitchen. So you really could do everything you want in your own apartment. You don't have to leave your room. But if you're going to go watch the Twins game and it got rained out and you're bored, there's always stuff going on in the community. There's people all around you doing different things. So you always have that socialization option there. Similar to the previous setting, you're going to get relationships with folks that are going through similar things that you are. Everyone that lives in assisted living, for the most part, has some sort of care needs. You can live in an assisted living and not take any services. So you could move into Ecumen North Ranch, for example, and not take any services at all, but just want to be there for when the time comes. So you don't have to transition again when you actually need some care help. Activities, again, tailored to the interests of those who live in those buildings. So now you're not going to see a bunch of people playing Xbox or something. They're going to be doing stuff that you guys enjoy, at least hopefully. This is kind of, again, a sidestep, just like home care is. This is what we call care suites or advanced assisted living. And I say it's a sidestep because this really varies building to building. So Ecumen North Branch, for example, could be considered an advanced assisted living because the cares we offer can go from simple housekeeping to just below a traditional nursing home level. So we can really offer a high level of cares in our building. Some assisted livings have a cap at where the care levels end. And that's where you would move on to the next care setting. A care suite is really a designated, more one-to-one care setting. I don't know if that makes sense. But a care ratio in a traditional assisted living is going to be one caregiver for every 10 to 12 residents. That's pretty typical. In a care suite option, it's going to be more like one caregiver for every 5 to 7. So you get a little bit more one-to-one time, hence my nephew's sword fighting with snakes. They did get in trouble for that. But in the care suite option, you do have the help on your time more often than not. So a lot of times folks that live in this setting or pursue this setting are folks with unique care circumstances. A good example of that is someone that has a difficult time speaking, and maybe they have to write down or text or type what it is they're asking for. Just with that type of condition, it's naturally going to take longer interactions between the caregivers. That's where a care suite option is better because they get that more interpersonal time. Memory care. Memory care is a topic that I like to talk about because it's often the most misunderstood topic. So the biggest thing that I want to emphasize with you guys today is memory care is an absolute need. It is not a choice. I would never say someone should choose to be in memory care, or we should choose to put mom or dad or sister or brother in memory care. We should only do that when it is a need, when it is clinically determined that's something that has to happen. Similarly with this picture, that lantern there that you see, actually, it's hard to tell, but it has a little bonfire flame. So if you were sitting parallel with it looking at it, it would have a little flame like it's a little campfire. And that was our fire time because there was a fire ban because of the fires in Canada. So this year we could not have a bonfire, but we brought a fire with us. Individuals who come to memory care usually have stayed in one of the previously mentioned care settings for a while before they come to memory care. Typically, you're going to have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's if you're going to a memory care setting. And the reason why I stress the absolute need rather than choice is because there are folks that live in assisted living with dementia or Alzheimer's for years prior to doing this. This is really based on what types of issues the individual is facing at the time. Most commonly, the issue that causes someone to need memory care is if they're at risk to leave. So if they're at risk to wander out of the building and not remember how to get back. That's usually the reason why we would switch someone to a memory care setting. In saying all that, memory care is absolutely beautiful, like this last sunset from our trip. It's a really good place for folks with those needs. They really get a lot of individualized help and individualized activities to really enrich their lives. We meet them where they're at, and they're with folks that are also at the same sort of level. The programming for memory care is very adjustable. So based on the current population of a memory care, it would be tailored specifically to those current residents. So maybe for 6-7 months, everyone can play 500 and they have no problem playing cards. And then maybe the second half of the year, we have more folks that are struggling with that, so we do something different. So we really tailor activities based on the current population. So it changes month to month, maybe every 6 months, however often it needs to. And the biggest thing, if I haven't mentioned yet, is this is a secured unit. So it's really good peace of mind for families if they put their loved ones in this space, that they are completely safe. More one-to-one time again, because care ratios are lower in a memory care setting, 1 to maybe 6, 1 to maybe 7. We have 20 memory care units in our facility, and we have 3 caregivers at a time for that unit. So gives you a good idea of the how much time they get with each person.
Can you repeat that? Was it, what did you say, 20 people, 3 caregivers?
Yep, 20 people, 3 caregivers during the morning and evening hours. On the overnight, we would have only 1 or 2, just because most time people are sleeping, so you don't need as many. So the next setting here. So this is what we called skilled nursing. This has 2 avenues. So I will talk about transitional care first. This is the rehab facility. It's either rehab, transitional care, or TCU is the 3 terms that are used usually. This is for someone with an acute illness. So maybe usually it's a break. So someone falls, breaks a leg, breaks a hip, something like that. They would usually have surgery and then be sent to a transitional care to rehabilitate and get back to home. More often than not, stays for this are 100 days or less. They're usually way less than that. Most of the times it's 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And then that individual could go back home. Sometimes it happens where they heal enough to go to one of the previously mentioned care settings. That is another common thing that occurs. The other piece of skilled nursing is the long-term care setting. Long-term care is super easy to figure out because it exactly says what it is. It's long-term care. So folks that need a high level of care for a long term. Typically this means from the point they move in till the point they have passed away. This is usually a setting where folks stay and they're not expecting to get better. This is often referred to as a nursing home. That's what it's traditionally referred to as. But the industry has moved to long-term care facility, care center, stuff like that. This is a suite living setting, so you're going to stay in a 300 square feet or less size room. You might have a college fridge, maybe a microwave, toaster, that kind of stuff. but it's going to really be a small setting. Okay, everyone's favorite topic. Finances, how do we pay for it? There is no real easy way to talk about this, and I have a policy of transparency, so the reality is all these care settings are very expensive. There is no way to hide that, and I don't want to hide that. Just as you see me, I don't know if you can see my face, but I was breathing pretty hard and probably sweating in places I'm not supposed to, as this portage was extremely difficult. Uphill, downhill, you can see all the rocks around my feet. It was pretty hard. It's the same thing for paying for this care setting. It really is something that you should plan for as best you can. Most facilities are going to require what is called private pay. Simply, that is, you're paying for it out of your own funds. The typical pathway to this is you sell the forever home, or you sell the cabin or something that you get a lot of money for to help paying. So you pay with that, or you pay with just Social Security, pensions, annuity, anything that you have savings-wise. There is no hiding, you are spending your assets. That just really is the reality here. Another way you can get help in payment is a long-term care insurance policy. The policies vary greatly, but they can pay a good amount. I've seen anywhere from $80 to $180 a day in coverage towards your care. So it's definitely a good thing to think about. It really does help a lot. And then there are other insurance plans you can look into that can help with this coverage. Just make sure you know the how they pay, the when they pay, and the where that goes. Sometimes they pay the facilities directly, sometimes they pay the individual. And the last piece is elderly waiver or CADI waiver. This is a county assistance program, or it's essentially medical assistance for seniors. They step in when an individual can no longer afford to privately pay. They will not step in if assets exist. So there is no way to get this assistance if you have the ability to pay. And they have a look-back period, so you can't just sell the cabin off to the kids and then get on the assistance. You do have to get past that look-back period. And it is typically years, not 1 or 2. It's usually more like 5, 7. So, but how it works is they would garnish any income you do have coming in. So that Social Security, that annuity, anything that you have coming in, they're going to garnish and use to pay for care first. After that, they fill in the gaps. So if whatever you have coming in is not enough, they will fill in and pay the rest. They leave a small expense budget, fund money, if you will, but it is small. It is less than $200 a month is what they would leave you with for maybe a cell phone plan or any food you want to do outside of your care facility. But your food, your care, and your housing is all paid for. It's a great program in a way. The only trouble is finding those spots can be hard. So finding an elderly waiver spot at a facility can be difficult because each facility is only going to have a certain percentage of their apartments that can be elderly waiver. We have a very high percentage at our facility. We let ours go up to 20%. Most facilities are 10% or less, or they have a specific number of designated rooms. So we have 50 apartments. In a traditional facility, you would have maybe 5 that would be allowed to be EW. So I feel like I have flown through this presentation. I am open for any questions you have. Before we do that, this is a quick little highlight of the trip here. So if you look at the bottom left, this is the starting point. Bottom right, that's after we came out and we went to a local restaurant. And then the final map of what we did. So the far left side where you see the starting of the line is where we started. There's a circle on the far right, that's base camp. And then other days while we were there, we journeyed around farther so you can get an idea of how much we did. This was less of a trip than we took the year before. So this was probably in total about 35 miles. The year before we did about 53. So for the financial piece, you're going to have a care plan that's specialized to you based on what the assessment from the assisted living says. That amount is going to be used in judgment to what finances you have left. So the county will come to you, ask for your financial information, review your total cost, and say, well, you still have 6 months left of private pay before we have to step in. So typically you're going to pursue this option when you've got about 3 months left of private pay.
So it's the county that it really does the evaluating?
Yep, so we do an evaluation to begin with. The county's gonna come back and evaluate because the county may think maybe you need less care than we assumed, or maybe more. Yes?
What if you don't have any money?
If you don't have any money,
I
yep.
mean, you can't go to those places, so.
If you don't have any money, so the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna contact the county to look for that elderly waiver program. There's gonna be care coordinators that help you find facilities that take elderly waiver off the start. Some communities do. So for example, our sister property, Prairie Lodge in Brooklyn Center, they take elderly waiver right away. We have a Hill Lock community in Minneapolis that does the same thing. So it really just depends on your situation, but there are special facilities that have almost entirely folks that are on the waiver.
Yeah, and are they lesser communities? They're not as good as some of like Acumen.
It depends. We have a brand new property that's like that. So it really just depends on where you go. So the Hill Lock is an example of a newer property that just opened that's taking all waivers. So, but traditionally speaking, yes, it's not gonna have the swimming pool, it's not gonna have the movie theater, that kind of stuff. I couldn't tell you. I apologize. What it really means is the elderly waiver is for 65 and older, caddy is for younger. So that's really what it's, if you have a condition that makes you have caddy, it means you're just under 65. Yep, so her question was, what if you have a couple and one needs care and one does not? So one is choosing or wants to stay home and one has to go to a care setting. So when they evaluate for these county assistant programs, they do split the incomes based on couples. So you are only going to be, you're getting half of your income if you're a couple, and that's how they determine whether or not you can afford it. There are options too where you can move into a facility together, especially into an assisted living facility. In those skilled nursing settings, it's usually not an option. But yes, they would look at your income as a whole and then differentiate it between the two parties. There are certain incomes that are only in some people's name or the husband's name or wife's name, so those go accordingly. But if it's all general income, then it would be just split in half.
So what is overall the average monthly cost?
So what she said is, how much is the average cost? Just a ballpark estimate of what it might cost, because a neighbor of hers looked into a facility that was going to be about $7,000 a month. As I mentioned previously, it is very expensive, so there really is no hiding that. The cost does vary based on location. So if you are closer to the cities, it is more expensive. If you are further from the cities, it is less.
So it would be 7,000 times 24 months, basically.
So she said it would be 7,000 times 24 months if they want you to pay 2 years of private pay. Now you wouldn't have to pay in advance. You pay it month to month. So you do have that amount of time. But yes, that is an extreme amount of money. Would I say a good average in our area for assisted living is probably anywhere from $45,000 to $6,000 a month for assisted living. Independent living, significantly cheaper. Obviously, there's no care setting. Memory care, more expensive. Skilled nursing, more expensive.
Is your independent living like, it's strictly for seniors?
So she asked if the independent living it's strictly for seniors, but is it based on your income? So there are some facilities that are income-based housing. For example, Uptown Maple Commons in North Branch, that is an Ecumen property as well. They are a HUD or an income-based location, but most of them are not. Most of them are strictly just senior housing. You're renting essentially an apartment designated with that age category. So you're only gonna have 55 plus seniors in it. She said, what's the average rent for independent living? So Ecumen North Branch does not have an independent living housing. So you can live in our assisted living as an independent person, but you still pay the rent of an assisted living person. So your cheapest rent in assisted living, or in living independently at Ecumen, is $32.60. a month. Yep. That's a 1-bedroom apartment. Yep. But that this is one of the things I like to talk about. So if you know that eventually care is probably down the road, if you choose to live independently in a assisted living facility, you're starting that clock for the 2 years of private pay. So if you pay the $32.60 number for 2 years, and then you all of a sudden need care, well, you've already met the threshold you need to. So you can get on that waiver right away if you have to, or if that's the financial time. But that's the best option if finances are ever, might be an issue in the future, which it's going to be for me. So, in my opinion, the best option when you look at assisted living, independent living, all that stuff, is if finances become an issue, or you think they will be, or you're predicting care settings may be necessary, move into the care setting first with low care cost, because you start your private pay clock right away. So if you moved into Ecumen North Branch tomorrow with no help and you just paid that $32.60 number a month, in 2 years paying that $32.60, you've already met your private pay threshold. Well, $32.60 a month times 24 is a lot cheaper than $7,000 times 24. So you save a lot of money that way, and you can stretch your finances better that way. It depends on the facility. Some that have independent livings do count the private pay in independent living towards care. Some don't. So that's definitely a good question to ask if you're looking at independent living, is does my payment count towards my care setting?
So, did you say that independent living, you can have like the life alert, they don't supply it, but if you supply it, somebody would obviously come help? This is for my mom.
Yep. So it depends. So if you live in an independent living that is housed in a care facility, so a good example would be Grace Point Crossing in Cambridge. They have an independent living that's housed in a full continuum of care. So they've got all the care settings plus independent living. You would get a pendant from them included in your rent. Caregivers that are in the building would come. But they can't help, so they do come to the room, but they cannot help. They can ask, do you want me to call 911?
Okay.
But if you have fallen, they can't help you get off the floor.
No, are there any facilities in, I would say, Chisago, Washington, Isanti counties with care suites?
So there's a couple facilities that I know of. I think county-wise they'd be Washington. So Care Suites Living, I think, in Hugo. There is a Care Suites Living in Brooklyn Park. There's about 7 or 8 of them in kind of the metro area. And then there's some other smaller independent ones that are traditional care suites. It's not a super common senior living housing, but it does somewhat exist. I don't know of any in Chisago.
And I was just going to say, my mother was at Parmley in assisted living for 8 years. So the cost you quoted was, and she did not receive additional cares until the very last year. So that was accurate for what they would have. And I believe that the apartments affiliated at Parmley are also income-based, the ones that are on the lake.
They may be, yeah.
Yeah, they are.
And Velcommon in Lindstrom is, to my knowledge, income-based also.
I have someone at Point Pleasant Heights, and I believe it was like closer to $1,600 a month in that independent living there.
Yeah, for independent living, yep. Yeah, it depends. Independent living can vary. So for us, you still pay the assisted living cost. But Riverwood Village, for example, the property I ran, the base rent there is $1,100, and that's an independent living. Like you mentioned, Point Pleasant Heights is around $16. So it is a lot cheaper usually in a standalone independent living. If you're in an independent living that is connected to more care settings, it's almost always more expensive. Yes, in the back.
If you go to independent living like at Point Pleasant Heights, and then you need further care, does that money you've paid there, does that go toward the final thing like you were talking about with other?
She asked if you go to a standalone independent living, that is partnered with the company, and you go to their next care setting. So, good example, you go to Point Pleasant Heights here in Chisago, which is an Ecumen property, and then you come to Ecumen North Branch once you need care. The payment from there does not necessarily count. There is some little bit of leeway more because you've lived within an Ecumen property, so if you don't have the 24 months, maybe you have 18, probably would just be fine, but it doesn't count fully.
I'm a caregiver for my husband who has Alzheimer's, and we're living in our own home. But I'm worried about if something should happen to me, which it did before. Do they have respite care? Is there something like that? Is there any emergency care anywhere where he could go?
So there isn't a respite care nearby. It is something that, her question was, she's the caregiver for her husband, and if something happens or if she goes out of town, is there any respite type care for her husband? So there really isn't a lot of respite care in our area. Ecumen North Branch did used to have a respite room. It's an idea we're floating on trying to restart. But in general, the assisted livings are all month-to-month leases anyway. So if you knew you were going to be out of town for an extended period of time, you could rent an apartment for a month, turn in your notice right at the end of the month, and you'd be out of it. So it still kind of acts as a respite, but it's not designated as respite care.
I did talk to somebody yesterday or the day before at Parmalee about being concerned about myself. If something happens to me and they need emergency care for my husband, is there a place he could go? And she said respite care if they have a bed.
Yep.
So I don't know if all the other nursing homes have the same.
Yeah, it's fairly similar. She asked if something happened to her, is there an emergency service that she could send her husband to or he could go to, like a respite. And it really just depends on availability and what facilities have to offer. I am not familiar with any facility off the top of my head that has respite in Chisago. If someone knows, shout it out. But I do not know that for sure.
I don't know any in Chisago unless it would be in some of the home settings. I don't know if any of the home settings, the group home settings that they.
She said that she doesn't know of any respite cares in the Chisago area, similar to me, but she said there are some in like the Centerville area as far as respite goes.
And then you go just a little further, like to White Bear Lake.
Yep, the closer you get to the cities, like White Bear Lake area, the more options that become available. So it's similar to what I said earlier, the farther out you get, the cheaper costs get, but the less care is available. Closer to the cities, way more care, lots of options, but more expensive.
I was thinking about independent living, and some places are subsidized,
Yep.
and can you have any money in the bank? I know my mom was at Washington Square in White Bear, and I think she had to have $3,000. Is that still true? Oh.
Yep, so the question was, is some places are subsidized, and if you go live in an independent living that's subsidized, can you have any money in the bank? So that is all really worked out with whatever programs you're having. I'm not sure the specific details to that, but my assumption is that if you have any money in the bank at all, it's limited. So you can't have, $50,000 sitting on the side, or you wouldn't qualify.
And all right, and I have another question. If care is at home, can you get 24-hour care at home?
Yes. The question was if care is at home, so if you choose that home care option, can you get 24 hours of care? Yes, but quotations, because you are reliant on that caregiver that they are sending or whatever the home care agency is providing. So if that individual is sick or calls in or doesn't show up, then you're on hold waiting for the home care agency to try and find someone to call in. Versus a facility, if one individual calls in and doesn't show up, there's still 4 or 5 more there. So a little more risk as far as consistent care by bringing 24-hour care home, and trying to find someone willing to do 24-hour care is also difficult.
And is it cheaper?
She asked if it's cheaper, and the answer is no. For the most part, it is not cheaper.
Well, the reason I'm asking is my mother's at Ecumen Lakeview Commons in Maplewood.
Yep.
And her problem is that she's used to having somebody there all the time. So she wants somebody there all the time. And of course, they're not there all the time.
Right.
So I was just thinking if you had somebody at home.
Yeah. She referenced that her mom is at Ecumen, Lakeview Commons, and she's used to having someone there 24/7, and she's just asking about whether that's a possibility. And again, it is. You could hire someone to come be the overnight person in her apartment. It doesn't even have to be a care provider. It could just be a companion. That's services that are available as well. You could hire someone to just be around for socialization or, help ease the mind. That's significantly cheaper than care. Yes.
So kind of along that line, you said Ecumen does have, they provide the care, in-home care? Did you say that?
No, we do not. So she asked if Ecumen has home care, and we do not.
Okay. I'm taking care of my mom. Sometimes I just need a break.
Yep.
Because we're at odds. Is there somebody that will come in and kind of watch her while I'm away if I went for a weekend or whatever? What kind of facilities would I look into for that?
Yep, so she asked if there would be, she cares for her mom and she sometimes wants a break. Is there someone that would come in maybe and watch her for a week or care for her for a week so she could take a vacation or something like that? That would be respite care.
Once they quote you a monthly rate, does that generally stay for a while, or can they raise that or never raise?
That's a good question. She said once they quote you a monthly rate, does that stay for a while or can it change? And just like everything else in this world, prices change. They typically change once a year. So just like a standard apartment's going to have a yearly increase, it would be the same in assisted living. Cares don't always get raised in cost. But the individual plan you maybe start with, so you move in tomorrow and you're on care level 6, let's say, you're not necessarily stuck at care level 6. If in a week we realize really you only really need care levels 3, we would change your package and you'd be prorated to only pay for the days on that each individual rate. Yep, so she mentioned that she did hospice care for a while, and that is a great option too. I didn't include it in this presentation just because hospice isn't necessarily a care setting, it's more of a care service. So you would already typically be in one of these settings, and then you would add on hospice services, which is really for folks that they are considering are going to be passing away soon. So you have to meet a threshold of health status just to qualify. And then it's a really great benefit because they send in care, and a lot of the care is essentially free because it's covered by insurance. But they can send in home care, they can send in folks to the facilities as well, so it's a way to cut cost in an assisted living, because if you qualify for hospice, you can use hospice services instead of the care facilities services to help pay your cost.
And I'll just add to that, I work in hospice, and that, if you have, it really is based on your prognosis. So the doctor would say, possibly have 6 months or less. You have end stage such and such a cancer, or, different diseases, congestive heart failure or whatever. But really, we never have a crystal ball, right? So you jump on we encourage people to get on hospice services earlier so that they can live with the benefit and have those extras and that extra layer of support if they're in a facility or even at home. So if you do fall or something like that, the hospice nurse is just called and she comes out. So it's available earlier than you might think.
Yes, sir.
Is there any source you could go to find out how nursing homes are rated or care centers are rated?
Yeah.
Quality?
Yep, that's a great question. He said, is there any source you can go to find out what facilities are rated or how people perceive them or what people are saying about those facilities? There's a plethora of review sources online. If you go to Google and just search senior livings in my area, there's going to be Google reviews right away that show what people are starring that facility, and then you can click into different links to see what overall ratings are. The best way to find out though is to go. Just go to that facility and visit and see what it's like. You get a pretty good vibe. In my 5 years of traveling facilities to facilities, you don't know until you're there. And it doesn't take long once you're there to get an idea of what it's like. Yeah, there you go. Yes.
I'm just beginning to look into things. I'm reaching a point where I'm going to need some help. Do you have any information about how cooperatives work?
Yeah, so her question was, she's just beginning to start looking into things. Does she have any information about how cooperatives work? This is a relatively new subject in senior living. I've only started hearing about it in the last maybe 4 or 5 years. I'm not super familiar on it. I know you're buying into a community-based living option. Usually you're like renting to own, but that's about all I know about it. It's typically in like more of the independent living category. So most of the time you're gonna have to bring in care if you want it.
What type lodging is available in this area or a little closer to the metro area?
What type of lodging is available?
As far as buildings, I mean, are they all multi-story or are they single-story?
She asked what kind of lodging, so multiple stories, what kind of spaces are available. So it really depends. So most assisted living or care settings are almost always apartment settings. So you're gonna be in a complex, have anywhere from a 300 square foot to an 800 square foot apartment. And that's just how most care settings are. Independent livings completely vary. You could be in a townhome setting, you could be in a condo, apartments, kind of all over the place. And there is so many options as far as living options in this area alone, and then as closer you get to the cities, it just explodes. There's a lot of availability.
And also, then I have another question. In other areas, I know there are systems where you pay originally like a lump to go into their network, and then you start at independent, and then you can transition to the other levels of care more easily. Is there anything like that around?
Yeah, so I'm gonna touch on both of those. So the first thing she said was just commenting how great of a program hospice is, and how, was your mother correct? Her mother was on hospice for 18 months and was never questioned whether she still qualified or anything like that. So like mentioned earlier, it's usually a prognosis of 6 months or less left to live. That's how you qualify for hospice. But just like your mother, my grandmother had Alzheimer's for 17 years, and she was on hospice for probably 3.5 towards the end stage. Same thing, we have 6 months left to live, and then 6 month mark says, oh, well, she's great, let's start over. But they're not very, pushy about trying to get them off. They're way more trying to keep people on hospice as long as they are benefiting and they still do qualify. Second thing she touched on are certain type of facilities where you pay what is called an entrance deposit. So a big lump sum that you give to the facility right away, and that they pick off of that to help pay for your costs. I know that in some larger facilities, they take a large sum right away. Typically, this is $50,000 or more. They would take right away. They reduce your rent cost, so you still are paying rent out of what you have income-wise, but they reduce your rent cost with that lump sum. It's an interesting dynamic because they're basically taking your money right away, using it to reduce your cost, but you're still paying a cost. The nice thing in a way is that if you do run out, like if your income for some reason changes and you run out, you do still have that lump sum sitting there to help pay. The strange thing to me is that if you have that lump sum available, you really wouldn't struggle to pay. So it's strange to me that they ask for it up front. But in a way, a lot of folks can't generate that lump sum. So a little bit of gatekeeping. Anyone else? Are we okay?
Probably should wrap up.
Sweet, we made it.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give Jordan again.